very good afternoon to all of you. Change is inevitable. It is the rate of change that matters. Countries and populations that have the ability to grasp, accept, and utilize such changes, and to get the best out of such changes, have become the leaders of the global competition. Amongst the educated, intelligent masses, there comes a few individuals who are considered special. They are the change agents. They are considered special not only because of their educational qualifications, not only because of their intelligence, not only because of the depth of understanding of their chosen specialties, or their clarity of thoughts, but for their courage, wisdom, perseverance, and their exceptional ability to accept challenges and the pressures that comes with it when trying to change, and their thirst to achieve results, which brings progress to the populations they serve and the countries they live, and the countries are fortunate to have them. Vidya Jyoti Professor V.K. Samaranayake is one such rare change agent Sri Lanka was fortunate to have. Your Eminence, Reverend Dr. Oscar Gomez, Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Lakshman Dissanayake, Director of the UCSC, Professor Heva Gamake, Deputy Director Dr. Atukorala, Mrs. Shreya Samaranayake, the orator of the Vidya Jyoti, Professor V.K. Samaranayake oration, Professor Roger Stern from Reading University, Mr. Dharma Siripiris, distinguished invitees, all the respected university academics, including all the deans of the other faculties and administrators, other distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. It is with an immense happiness and sense of deep gratitude in my heart that I unveil the building plaque which contains this multifunction auditorium, which Professor Samaranayake envisioned half a century ago. We are all eternally grateful to him for being a change agent 50 years ago and establishing a university college school of computing to produce excellent human resources required for socio-economic development of our country. I felt deeply honored when I accepted this invitation. Thank you.
It is indeed an honor to have a person of your caliber as our chief guest, and we say thank you once again to you, sir. A big thank you going out to our chief guest, Professor Mohan De Silva, the chairman of the University Grants Commission. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are almost at the oration, and before we come to that, we have in fact a special message. Now, this message is in fact contained in your volume, 50th anniversary volume copy as well. So it's a bit of a lengthy message, and I'm not going to, in fact, read out this message, but just to bring to your kind notice that this message is coming from a Sri Lankan-born computer scientist from the University of Oxford, okay? Renowned, a pioneer in the true sense of the word in the field of computer science, and is well known for his development of the sorting algorithm, quicksort and Hoare logic. I'm talking of Professor Sir Tony Hoare. So he has in fact sent a very special message, and this message, this one, is contained in your 50th anniversary volume edition. So I suggest that you take time whenever possible to read through the message. It's a very special message from Professor Sir Tony Hoare attached to the University of Oxford. And saying that, we are now getting ready for the 10th oration. And the orator, the very well recognized orator, will be introduced formally by Senior Professor of UCSC, Professor N.D. Kodikara. So we'd like to very warmly invite Professor N.D. Kodikara for the formal introduction to our orator, who will be on stage in a moment.
Chief Guest, Chairman of the University Grants Commission, Chancellor of the University of Colombo, Vice Chancellor, Deans, distinguished guests, Mrs. Samranayaka and family members, Director and the staff of the UCSC, staff of the other faculties, students, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of computing at the University of Colombo. We are also having the Professor V.K. Samaranayaka Oration 2017. I am pleased to introduce the orator, Emeritus Professor Roger Stern. Professor Stern obtained his BSc degree in Mathematics and Physics in 1966 and MSc in Statistics in 1968, both from the University of Sussex, United Kingdom. He received his PhD in Statistics from the University of Reading in 1972. In 1974, then Dr. Roger Stern, a young senior lecturer of the University of Reading, was invited to visit the Faculty of Science, University of Colombo, for a 2-year assignment to promote the statistical unit of the mathematics department to a National Center for Statistics Research, Teaching and Consultancy. This visit was under a 10-year Colombo-Reading Link program funded by the British government. The Link program was initiated by late Professor Samaranayaka. As the university did not have computers, it was soon realized the computing facilities need to be established in order to do teaching computing and also for statistical data analysis. Dr. Roger Stern initiated the purchase of the first computer for the university, a HP 9825 mini computer under this Link program. This computer had a single line display, a card reader, and a thermal printer. He also contributed later to purchase many computers, including the Data General Eclipse S140 computer. Today we are celebrating the 50th anniversary in computing. It is very appropriate to have an orator who has contributed significantly to build the computing facilities at the university. In 1982, Professor Stern brought a BBC microcomputer to the Colombo University even before it was released to the UK market. Since then, several BBC computers were purchased by the university and a BBC microcomputer lab was established. Professor Stern realized the potential of this little computer and he wanted to develop a statistical package to be used on this computer. He initiated a project to develop a statistical package InStat together with the staff of the statistical unit and the Reading University. He was an excellent programmer and came up with a brilliant idea of memory management to utilize the limited memory available in this computer to run a large system. We witnessed this development taking place as junior staff members of the statistical unit. Our Vice Chancellor, also a staff member of the statistical unit at that time. One noticeable feature which we have seen about Dr. Stern was his efficiency of working. He was very active, quick in his work, and also make decisions with the others. When he worked with Professor Samaranayaka, it was a perfect combination, and they did a lot of work together. He also contributed to establish the MSc in Applied Statistics degree program under the Colombo Reading Link. Under this program, many staff members of the Reading University visited the statistical unit for teaching and consultancy in statistics. Some staff members of the Department of Mathematics visited UK and obtained their postgraduate research degrees from the universities in UK. Professor Stern supported the establishment of SCADS, Statistical Consultancy and Data Processing Service at the Statistical Unit to provide services to other organizations and research institutes such as CRI, RRI, TRI, etc. Professor Stern started a project to collect and analyze rainfall climatic data in Sri Lanka from more than 100 stations for about 100 years. This was a massive project with computer-based data processing, which involved many staff members and research assistants. He also started a survey with using rice data as well. Considering his immense contribution to the areas of statistics and computing at the university, he was conferred the Doctor of Science honoris causa by the University of Colombo at the convocation held in 1984. Professor Stern provided his services to many African countries in similar way. From 1990 to 1997, he served as a chief statistician of the International Crops Research Institute for the semi-arid tropics in Niger. From 1977 to 1916, Professor Stern served as a chief biometrician and professor of applied statistics in the Statistical Services Center in the University of Reading. Since 2016, he is working as the director of the Statistics for Sustainable Development Center in the Reading University. I invite Professor Stern to the stage.
Before Professor Stern commences his oration, we'll be inviting the director of the UCSC, Professor K.P. Hewagamage, who will garland Professor Stern with the oration medal. So we'd like to very warmly invite Professor Hewagamage on stage for the garlanding, and thereafter we commence the oration.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, when I was asked to give this 10th oration, I felt very humbled, but it was a wonderful occasion for me to remember such a great person and somebody I considered a close friend. At that time, I did not realize that this was not only the 10th oration, but it was also 50 years of computing. Not only that, I think one can sometimes judge somebody not just by what they did when they were here, but also by what happened when they left. And this building is a testimony to the tireless efforts, I think, of the university and his staff. So I warmly congratulate the University of Colombo Service for Computers and the staff of the university. I think this is a wonderful testimony, not just to Professor Samranayake, but to all the staff here. So many congratulations to you all. So, as has been said, I was the same era. When Professor Samranayake first taught Fortran programming, I first arrived in Reading University to teach statistics. And Statistics and computing, as you've seen in this discussion, have been very closely intertwined in the history of this university, and I think are an impressive part of that history. The Vice-Chancellor has challenged everybody to go across the borders of these different faculties and departments, and I think that's also an interesting example where statistics is now in the science faculty and separate from computing, but I hope we'll continue to work extremely closely together, not least because this new-ish subject of data science provides a challenge to do so. So, I'm afraid I'm going to call him Prof, because I always thought of him either as Sam or Prof. He was a very humble and easy person to get on with, as well as being just a wonderful person and such a great instigator of so many things. While he was teaching Fortran programming in Reading, I was using these machines with my students. And this, I think, is an idea of the difference. When I arrived in 1973, we'd only just stopped using them. And I don't know if you realize that teaching mathematics, even, with those machines, just what a difference that was. You see the handle at the side. If you want to take two numbers and divide them, you turn the handle anti-clockwise until the bell rings, and then you turn it back once, and you've done one place on your division. This was the way students, not in Sri Lanka, but students in the UK, were having to do their work in the late 60s and early 70s. I arrived partly because there were problems at the time with statistics. And so my job here was to help statistics become more applied. And some problems with statistics still persist today, because many people need some statistical skills. And the training for many non-statisticians used to have problems. And it was sometimes so bad, they didn't like statistics, even after their training. And they else didn't like statisticians very much. What was not so clear to them is statisticians in the past weren't trained very well either. They often lacked planning and data management skills. They were taught the theory. They were taught the nice analyses. They often lacked communication skills. And a good applied statistician is always one of a team. There was very little team building taught to statistics students. They didn't have many marketing skills. And so I found that unless one was careful, they were often sidelined in important developments and research projects. They sat there, they bemoaned their fate, whereas things happened round them. What was going wrong? Training was dominated by analysis. There wasn't enough on organizing the data. There wasn't enough on design. Often a recipe book approach was used, and we had many people coming to us to say, I have this data, which test should I use? Because they thought that like a recipe, you just had to find the test, and then you could do your analysis. And this wasn't with understanding of principles. Training emphasized formulae, and often hand calculation, even when computers were around. And the argument was, when you do it by hand, you get giving good experience of computers for good statistical practices. This is what I arrived to try and help with 40 years ago. My concern, and unlike Professor Samaranayake, perhaps this indicates what a failure I've been, is that in many countries that I now work, these remain as problems. And I do feel that, as has been said, with the status of this university and the quality of both computing and statistics, maybe the university is not being ambitious enough in thinking of it on the world stage. If I just give the one example, when we started our link, we had a very strong department of statistics at Reading, and it was building up here. It was such a pleasure to visit the Department of Statistics on Monday and see they are enormously strong. And I would be sending people to Colombo University Statistics far more easily, that I wouldn't send them to Reading anymore. And I'm very saddened to say this. About 20 years ago, we were quite strong. We now have 5 statisticians at Reading. You have 20 here, 10 with PhDs. And so the teaching here, quite unlike in many countries, and I give the contrast that I asked students who were statistics students starting their masters how large the data sets were that they'd analysed in their courses. Many of the students had not analysed any data at all, even though they were statistics students. And the largest data set from any student from any of the 60 countries had 60 rows of data. This is nothing in this day and age. When I asked the same question here on Monday, I got a multitude of answers. They are being taught in a modern and disciplined way that I think many countries could learn from. So the results often, with the poor teaching, are graduates with a near universal dislike of statistics, but a realization that they need it in their research work. So there's strong demand for relevant in-service training. And most of these past weaknesses in statistics were similar for statisticians. There was a secret that the statisticians didn't want you to know. A common statement by a statistician was, gosh, they've come to me too late and their experiment or their survey hasn't been well designed. They should have come earlier. And luckily nobody came earlier because actually the statisticians hadn't been taught very much about design either. And so but they never needed to answer those questions. So we needed to improve the teaching of statistics, and that's been one of my interests for my whole life. So the first paper we ever published was on the use of a computer for the teaching of statistics. I find it interesting that this was a computer, because in this day and age, in 1973, a university in the West would have a computer, and the university in Colombo, as you saw, had none, but there was one at the Department of Census. But you wouldn't have computers the way you saw later on. And it was clear that the computer in a UK university was going to become bigger and bigger, and life was going to be simple. And all that changed in the early 80s. But it was clear from very early on that the computer could help, or the computers could help enormously in teaching statistics. I also give this as an example that I sometimes find on my travels that people think of research rather narrowly. Research on teaching is research. We had a link, as many of you have heard of, and we published the link as a piece of research in a very reputable journal. So I urge people who are thinking of research and perhaps fearing that their teaching is going to get in the way of their research to perhaps consider they could add another line of research, which is research into effective teaching, and that could make their teaching even better. So in 1973, I arrived in Colombo, and I won't go through the absurdity of the fact that I was supposed to make the teaching more useful for the country, and they took somebody out of the UK who was rather young, who'd never been to the continent before, and I was supposed to do this. And there were some odd happenings around in 73, which meant by the time that Professor Samaranayake came back in 74, I did know about the country and what statistics was being used. I found 8 computers in the country, none in the university, but we had access to 2, and I used to cycle. I was in charge of this card punch and used to cycle to the Department of Census and Statistics with a whole deck of cards behind me and a very large umbrella, just in case it rained. Computing has changed. I was there to support undergraduate teaching, and Professor Samaranayake returned, and he was appointed as the department head. And then Ian Wilson came from Reading also, and he supported the start of the MSc course, and then we had the link. It had started informally well before that, but this is what Ian, and I hope you'll excuse me that you may have to read some of this because I don't think I want to read it out, wrote about Professor Samaranayake. And I just want to, as you read it, I just want to pick up on this aspect that Sam worked in his own way, and his way was extremely effective. It wasn't conventional, and we learnt from it. Perhaps Vice-Chancellor shouldn't see things like this, because it might give too many people ideas for the future. This isn't quite finished, but another aspect of Professor Samranayaka was that he was a university person, so he loved argument, and he didn't mind being criticized, and the logic of it. And he was a very straightforward person. And a number of you have also mentioned he was tremendous at multitasking. So I still have a very vivid memory of him sitting there in his office, and I brought along a visitor who was from another country. And Sam welcomed him, and he sat down in front, and then they started talking. But it was a typical meeting where there were also one person on the left and one person on the right and a third person on the phone. And this international visitor, and I was there, this international visitor got out and walked out. And Sam said, "What's his problem?" I was giving him my full attention. And the amazing thing is, he was. He was also giving all the other people his full attention, but somehow he could do that. So if you wondered why so much happened, he was a tremendous multitasker in an amazing way. And the way his mind could switch between different topics was just fabulous. So we had the link, and we wrote up about the link, and it involved all the Reading department. And Robert Curnow, who was in one of the early pictures there, was if we had an equivalent to Sam, it was Professor Robert Curnow, who became a very eminent statistician, and he and all the department benefited tremendously. So I'm sorry you've got another little bit of reading, but there isn't much more after, because I asked him to say a little bit about the link, and this is what he writes. This also gives me the opportunity to follow Robert Curnow and mention myself, Dr. Savitri Abeysekera, who was another absolutely key person in our connection at this time. And that story continues a little bit because Ian Wilson followed me and set up the MSc. He was then with his wife Jennifer, and in 1985 they separated. And it's to my great pleasure that in 1990, Savitri, then in the UK, married Ian and is now Savitri Wilson. So our link certainly continues in one way, and I wonder whether it could continue in other ways. I would like to take a number of topics that we did in this link that I think are still around today. And then there's some questions in these. So one of them, the first is statistical games. The second, as you've heard, I'm very interested, improving the climate for statistics was intended to be partly the idea of what is climate, and that's because we do work on climate work. What about the consulting service and statistical software? So let me start with the games. The crop cutting survey is something that's happened in Sri Lanka since 1952. Rice is so important in Sri Lanka. And here's a graph of the crop cutting survey. And in about 1978, a lady called Anila Vijayasinghe came. She's now, I think, Anila Dias Bandaranayaka. And she just came for a shorter visit. And one of her jobs was to see whether we could turn the crop cutting survey into a game. And we did. A statistical game, really a simulation. I should tell you one other small story about her, which she won't like, but I don't mind that. She arrived, and her first morning, she arrived maybe at 9 o'clock, and at 12 o'clock, the administrator of our department came to see me and said, this lady, Anila, is very charismatic, isn't she? And I said, yes, she's a very interesting lady. And she said, yes, you know, we have 4 secretaries in the department now, We had secretaries in those days, and they've all stopped all their other work, and they're all working for her. And she had that ability, and this is why she was very productive. So we invented a game, and this was a survey game. And we challenged students. At that stage, of course, we didn't have many computers. So the idea was that we would challenge students, usually working in pairs, to design their survey from the 160 farmers in these 10 villages. But the villages were a different size. So they first had to decide how many villages, then they decide how many fields and which field, and then what plots within the field to do their crop cutting. And choosing a plot, which you can picture, meant choosing an envelope in those days. And they chose the envelope, but they would interview the envelope. And when they interviewed the envelope on this one, this had a size of 1 acre. It had fertilizer of 200 weights per acre, and it was old improved rice. And then, from within the envelope, they could take 1 or 2 slips of paper to get the yield. They now had their data, which they had to enter into a spreadsheet or into a statistics package, and then they had to do the analysis. I do find one aspect of this interesting, that many statistics problems are multi-level. When I look at what's being promoted as data science, I don't see multi-level coming in very much. I think we're going back a step in some aspects. So we invented this game, and of course it was played with envelopes. Here you're looking at the survey, which is captured from the computer version of the game, which we made in the 1990s. However, we found that playing the game on the computer had a few problems. They didn't seem to get the hang of it as much as where you put these villages out on a large set of table and people could visualize the population and then the sample and then the data and the analysis from the beginning of the study to the end. Much better if they actually saw it physically. By the year about 2010, when we tried to use the computer version, the language had disappeared and we couldn't get it. And we still now find that the last time we used this was this time last year, and many students, 54 MSc students, found this highly novel and educational. So this is one of the things we started with 40 years ago. And here's some of the data from it. And we use this as an example to show simple data analysis. I just want to draw your attention to these villages. I don't know if any Sri Lankans here recognize these villages. They're rather unusual names for Sri Lanka villages. The first one is Sabi, which stands for Savitri Abesekara. Then there's Kesson. Now you might get the idea of Kevin Senivaratna. Followed by the person who just proposed me, Nihal Kodikara. And then I felt it was wonderful that I'd been doing all this liaison with Nandasara, and there he is immortalized in our statistical game. Climate. As Professor Kodikara has said, we spent a long time analyzing climatic data. This was a long time before climate change became so important. And I do think there is continued scope for continuing these analyses. And so this is another of these areas that is in the past with our link that I think can continue. These data that we use are not used much by the National Met Services. They're all trained in physics and meteorology, not statistics. This was an era before the National Met Services guard their daily data as much as they do now. There are ways around that, which we need to find. But I think there's quite scope for coming there. And currently, the world over, because of climate change, there's tremendous emphasis on climate work, especially in agriculture for small-scale farmers. And I'm showing you here what it usually does. Most projects for small-scale farmers start by going to the meteorological department, and they say to them, we've got a big project, what can you do? They're all trained in physics and meteorology. So they say, we can improve our forecast, And we can also have a long-term forecast, a seasonal forecast, which is absolutely true. But what we did, because we've got the statistics, is we added a component long before the season where we analyse the long-term data. We don't have problems getting the data from the National Met Service because we ask them to do the analyses. We don't ask for their data. Who's going to give them the capacity building so they can do the analysis? Well, I think it should be the computing and statistics people within the university. And this is a project which is in many countries. I haven't seen it in Sri Lanka, but many countries in Africa and in the Caribbean is current now. And part of the interest in this, and this is an example from Western Kenya, is that many people are amazed that you don't need education to look at pictures and to count. So doing the analyses and working out the risks for themselves, here's a sample of African villages from the west of Kenya, most of the ladies having had zero education at all. And they have no problem with the calculations they're being asked to do. And being asked to do the calculation has brought the subject alive to them, and they very much enjoy this. My third subject is statistical consultancy. My belief, and I haven't changed, when I arrived in 1973, is if you're truly going to do applied statistics, you must apply the statistics yourself. Otherwise, you go into the more theory. And in Colombo, I took a list of the consultancy we gave. And this is a very small list. I've given a few more in the written version of the paper. But there's really quite a lot of impressive clients here. And this means you bring these topics back into your teaching. In Reading University, we didn't do it, but we did it slightly differently. We set up the Statistical Services Centre in 1983, which was 100% self-financing. But we were very keen on having a lot of consultancy work within the university for outside people as well. Now, what's the situation? Well, Colombo University, the statistics department, it's all part of the Colombo Science and Technology Cell, which has set itself up as a limited company based in the university. Perfect. It's working very well. And it's going to be a big success for another very special reason, because their office is exactly where I started work almost 45 years ago. It's in the statistical unit. So obviously, it's destined for success. In Reading, what we found is universities have become less conducive, so we moved out of the university, but we're continuing our consultancy work, and we're linking with a number of other universities now. Statistical software. I have a question, because I'm with lots and lots of computer people. I don't know another subject like this. Maybe you can say Fortran is still alive, but it's not as favored as it was before. SAS and SPSS, if you're interested in statistics, are the standard statistics packages that you would know about, particularly SPSS. And it started 50 years ago. It's the 50th anniversary of these statistics packages. Most software isn't like that. If I give you quickly an example, everybody now uses Excel, but they didn't always use Excel. Before Excel, there was Lotus, and everybody used Lotus. And before Lotus was VisiCalc. And we're still not back to the 80s. What are the other subjects? And I'm going to ask the other visitors to tell me the other domains where the standard software now is 50 years old. And that's very interesting, to my mind, in a number of ways, because if you take SPSS, every time there's a new invention in statistics, they add it. But they never subtract anything. That's incredibly confusing for students. So microcomputers came in the 1980s, and there were lots and lots of stats packages, including our little Instat, which, as you heard, was jointly developed by the computer people within our unit here and Reading. We then added climatic facilities. And I have to say, slightly sadly, that it's still used today. Very few of the packages in the 80s are used today. It's still used today because things like the start of the rains and dry spells aren't in any other, or there isn't other good software for that. But it needs to change. And I'm doing a sidetrack now, which I can do very quickly, because as has been told, we actually contributed to the election, and I was there the first time this happened. And that continues still. And this is the message from the then Vice-Chancellor to Professor Samranayake and the team. No, this was by the Commissioner of the Elections to the Vice-Chancellor. I will just tell you one story about that. When the Commissioner of Elections this first time round was using Professor Samranayake's computing, he was extremely suspicious. He felt that this newfangled idea wasn't going to work. I have to say, if he'd known about our standard of programming, he wouldn't have let us in the building, never mind be suspicious. And we were very lucky. But it did work. In the end, he felt his team down in the basement were going to be very slow, but at least they would not make mistakes. Luckily for us, he didn't see the mistakes we made, but there were 4 discrepancies between the computer results and his team. They were only small, but they were all his team. So by the end, he was more convinced, but not very convinced. When the last district had been announced, we immediately had the results. Of course, we were using a computer. His team down in the basement had to add up again for all the districts. Meanwhile, the television cameras were there, as you heard. It was the first presidential, and J.R. Jayawardena was there, and the whole cabinet was there. And these television cameras were trained on the commissioner. And of course, nothing was happening because he was waiting for his team. And the television continued, and the cabinet sat there in the town hall. Sam was just behind. And it went on and on and on. After just over an hour, the commissioner lost his nerve and said, "Professor Samranayake, could you give me the results?" And Sam had scribbled them down on a bit of paper, which is highly unofficial, and handed them over to the commissioner. We knew that J.R. Jayawardena had just over 51%, and therefore there was no second round, and he was the president. And this was now read out. And a little bit later, he came to see Sam. He said, "I'm very relieved. 2 things. 1, I got the same result from down there, and 2, that took another hour and a half afterwards." And so a little known story about that first time. But we survived, and as you've heard, it's been used ever since. What about our Instat? Well, we now believe R is the future. And so we're now hard at work on what we call our Instat, with the same sort of objectives. And I just wonder whether here's one of the items where we could pick up our link and work together once again. We would find that very nice. We're 2 years into a project developing a front end to R to make it even easier, and also to help the climatic analyses be modernized so I can at last throw my old Instat away. I want to finish with 3 more topics. I've given you the first one. What now? Sadly, Sam has not been here for the last 10 years. I've picked out 3 topics from the last 10 years, and I wonder whether he would have jumped on this bandwagon. Maybe you have already. Maybe things would be different. So the first is computer-based maths. Each one of them has a TED talk. So this is a very stimulating talk by a man called Conrad Wolfram, who is the brother of Stephen Wolfram, who is Mathematica, saying we should teach children and university people real maths with computers. And his complaint is that currently, and it's the same in England or in the UK, we tend to teach calculating. We teach arithmetic and then algebra and then a bit of calculus, but we're teaching people how to calculate, all by hand. We should use the computer for all this, and then we can teach much more than calculating. And he makes a very persuasive argument. Of course, people have objections, One of the objections is you need to learn with paper first, and then you can move to the computer. And he gives a very nice argument about this. Here's his daughter, who's 8. And he says to his daughter has a hobby, which you sort of see here, which is she draws computers on pieces of paper. And he said to his daughter one day, you know, when I was your age, I didn't do that. I didn't draw computers on pieces of paper. Can you think why that is? And she thought for a minute, and then she said, no paper? And his point is that just because paper is invented before computers, once they're both around, does it matter which order they appeared in? Why does basic always mean you use the oldest one first? And there is certainly food for thought. However, before you jump on this bandwagon, you should look at his website, because it does seem to me it's an interesting example of a wonderful set of ideas that you could learn from, but putting it into operation seems harder in practice for him than giving a wonderful TED talk. So I wonder how much it's a bandwagon you should jump on. How much would Sam have jumped on that? This was 2010. In 2012, I think it's 2012, Daphne Koller from Stanford gave this wonderful lecture on MOOCs, where she discussed the fact that there was a class of 400 and they wanted to make it bigger, and it then became a MOOC, and it was opened up to everybody free of charge, and it was 100,000. And it was all free. In Reading University, we now produce MOOCs as part of a consortium. When we asked the people who were driving the MOOC production, and maybe you produce lots of MOOCs, when we asked Reading people why they're doing it, the answer was, it's better to be in than out, which didn't seem a very convincing answer. Before, if you're not spending lots of money in your wonderful new computer center producing MOOCs, you should also now look in 2016 at articles which discuss why MOOCs are dead. I don't think they're dead, especially if you look at some of the sets of these, but they're certainly not being treated in the same way as they were. It's difficult with computing. You've got to be careful which bandwagon you leap onto. But here's one I think that Sam would have taken, and this is what I'm finishing on. This is a very remarkable person called Neil Turok. He's a South African, but his parents, who, as you can see, are white, were evicted from South Africa because they were against apartheid in the 70s. So he grew up in Kenya and Tanzania, went off to Cambridge, and he's worried about the origins of the universe. And he's written lots of papers with Stephen Hawkins, and he's now the director of the Perimeter Institute in Canada. But he never forgot his interest in Africa, and he has set up an inspirational MSc for African students doing mathematics. So they never have to go abroad to do their MSc. They can go abroad for their PhD, but they don't have to go abroad for their MSc. And it is a truly wonderful series of degrees. So TED, these series of TED Talks, they give prizes. And he won the TED Prize in 2008. And he used that to say, I don't want this one institute, which is regional, and you can see how many countries have benefited. I want to now have another one of these institutes. I want 15 of these. And so far he's got 6, and funding from all over the world, and producing 300 very interesting MSc graduates who have an inspirational course. I find it interesting that if you remember back to the past with Professor Samaranayake, he had many dimensions, and one of them was his trips to Trieste. He was also very interested in physics. So this combination of a theoretical physicist worrying about many practical things, here's another kindred spirit. I feel sure Sam may have met him, but if he didn't, he should have done. And I do think that this is an African success story that other places could learn from, and I think Sam would have done that. So finally, I'd very sincerely like to thank you for this opportunity to give this talk. I feel it's a wonderful way for me personally to pay just a little bit my respects to Professor Samaranayake. He was such a privilege to know as a colleague and a friend, and it's wonderful as I see here and everywhere just how well he's remembered by so many people. Thank you all very much.
The 10th oration, the 10th Vidya Jyoti Professor V.K. Samaranayake Memorial Oration, delivered by Emeritus Professor Roger Stern from the University of Reading, United Kingdom. Let's say a big thank you to Emeritus Professor Roger Stern. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And we have another spot of entertainment. So once again, we'd like to invite the students of the University of Visual Arts, Visual and Performing Arts for another dance performance. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a dance item coming up next.
It was in 1998 that the founding director of the University of Colombo School of Computing, late Vidya Jyoti, Professor V.K. Samaranayaka, initiated International Information Technology Conference, IITC. It was a forum for presentation of ideas and cutting-edge developments by researchers and academics in the field of computing. In 2010, IITC was renamed and relaunched as the International Conference on Advances in ICT for Emerging Regions. It was intended to obtain a wider international participation and promote research and development in computing in the emerging regions of the world, especially in Asia, Pacific, and Africa. With this relaunch, ICTA was able to attract the international recognition that was due and was able to emphasize the regional importance at this conference. Since the beginning, ICTA has been playing a pivotal role in creating a platform for computer scientists and academics to present their achievements and ideas while being subjected to a strict peer review. ICTA has been able to obtain IEEE technical co-sponsorship and indexing by IEEE Explore due to its maintenance of high quality. UCSC believes ICTA as one of its most significant annual events, considering its ability to promote research and disseminate knowledge in collaboration with other universities and industry locally and regionally. As a result, a significant number of academics worldwide and practitioners in the industry have joined with us by submitting and reviewing research papers, conduct workshops, as well as by contributing to organize the conference. In 2016, UCSC organized the 16th International Conference of ICTA in September at the Hotel Jetwin-Blow, Negombo. It brought together nearly 200 local and international participants and 4 keynote speakers from 3 countries for 2 days of productive deliberations. It was held with Professor P.S.M. Gunaratna as the chief guest and Professor Mohan Munasinghe as the guest of honor. Every year, the selected best papers are published on a special issue of the sister journal ICTA, exposing quality work in an extended format. This year, ICTA is holding its 17th conference, having reached the significant milestone of Google's H5 median index ranking of 11, reflecting its quality as an attractive venue of publication and dissemination for researchers in the field of computing. It is time for the 17th International Conference on Advances in ICT for Emerging Regions, ICTA 2017.
That's the inauguration of the 17th ICTA. That's the inauguration. Come on, everybody. We made use of this platform and we made use of this opportunity for the inauguration of the 17th ICTA conference. And as you know, to be held on the 7th and 8th September this month. And that was the inaugural clip. And now we're going to have the inaugural address. And the inaugural address will be done by the chair of ICTA 2017, Dr. Noel Fernando. So we'd like to invite Dr. Noel Fernando for the inaugural address.
Professor Mohan D. Silva, Chairman, UGC, Your Grace, Reverend Dr. Oswald Gomes, Chancellor, University of Colombo, Senior Professor Lakshman Disanayaka, Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, Professor K.P. Hewagamagi, Director, UCSC, our orator, Professor Roger Stern, and all keynote speakers and all deans, and other academics and other people from the university, students and ladies and gentlemen. As conference chair of the 17th International Conference of Advances in ICT for Emerging Regions 2017, 2017, ICTA 2017. I have honor to welcome you on behalf of the ICTA 2017. It is a great pleasure for me to declare the opening ceremony of the ICTA 2017 and welcome the keynote speakers and participants from all over the world who came here to exchange experience and work together for a few days on the exciting field of computer science and information technology. We have the privilege of holding the conference in the beautifully furnished UCSC building complex and today open Vidya Jyoti Professor V.K. Samaranayak Auditorium. I wish to thank warmly initiated by the Professor V.K. Samaranayaka, then Professor G.N. Vikramanayaka, and Professor Hewagamage, and Professor Lakshman Disanayaka, Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo. Now I will have to give a brief introduction about the conference. This is a unique opportunity to present the research and development activities in the computer science and ICT domain. The success of the seminal International Information Technology, IITC, held in Sri Lanka since 1998. This is technically co-sponsored by IEEE. This proceeding of the conference are published in book form and in the electronic format via internet and the DVD form. All presented papers and abstract will be substract to the IEEE Explore. The selected papers will be invited for publication in the special issue of the ICTA Journal. And conference will be held on 7th and 8th of the September, and pre and post workshops on 6th and 9th of the September. In this time, we received 135 full papers, and we did the review process by 3 or more local and international reviewers. In this time, paper and poster acceptance rate is 40%. I would like to give a brief introduction of our keynote speakers. Professor Marshall Bonach from Institute of Technical Informatics, Grace University of Technology, Austria. His title is Dependable Computing Platform for the Internet of Things. And Professor Abhik Rochudar, ACM speaker, School of Computing, National University of Singapore. His title is Trustworthy Software and Automated Program Repair. And the next speaker, keynote speaker, Professor Kiyoshi Tanaka. He's from Faculty of Engineering, Shensei University, Japan. His title is Evaluationary Many Objective Optimization and Some Real-World Applications. And Professor Cripps from University of New South Wales and Sydney, Australia. His title is Accessing for Quality Decision Making. And Professor Rajasthan, his title is Climate Data Analytics for Agriculture. And final speaker, Professor Subramania from School of Engineering and Computing, National University of California. His title is Computational Science and Multidisciplinary Studies. And the workshops, regarding the workshops, today we had 2 workshops, software debugging and text analytics. And the 9th will be, there are 3 workshops, Internet of Things and e-assessment and algorithmic thinking for problem solving. In this conference, sponsors are completely organized by the University of Colombo School of Computing, technically co-sponsored by the IEEE, and our platinum sponsor is Cambio Software Engineering, and gold sponsor National Science Foundation, and silver sponsors are Millennium IT and IFS. Thank you very much.
So that's a gentleman who's vested with a huge responsibility as the chair of ICTA 2017, Dr. Noel Fernando. And finally, we have come to the vote of thanks. To deliver the vote of thanks, we'd like to invite the Deputy Director of the University of Colombo School of Computing, Dr. D.S. Atukorala.
Good afternoon. Chairman UGC, Professor Mohan De Silva, Chancellor, University of Colombo, Your Grace, Right Reverend Dr. Oswald Gomes, Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, Senior Professor Lakshman Dissanayake, Director, UCSC, Professor K.P. Hevagamuge, all Deans and Directors of Institute of University of Colombo, Registrar and Bursar of University of Colombo, Emeritus Professor Roger Stern, Mrs. Samaranayake, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored and privileged to propose a vote of thanks on this historic occasion to all those who have contributed in one way or the other to make this event a success. Let me express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to the Chairman of UGC and the Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor of University of Colombo for gracing this occasion despite their busy schedules. A special thank to Professor Roger Stern, who accepted our invitation and traveled all the way from United Kingdom to deliver the 10th annual Vidya Jyoti, Professor V.K. Samaranayake Memorial Oration on the topic, A Glimpse to the History of Computing at University of Colombo. Professor Stern, you took all of us a journey through time in computing and statistics at University of Colombo. We were able to have such a fascinating speech at this state-of-the-art venue thanks to an untiring effort of one individual who is none other than Mr. S.T. Nandasara. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Nandasara for the services he has rendered to University of Colombo and UCSC over several decades. Further, we are grateful to Mrs. Samaranayake and the family members for being with us and helping us to make late Professor Samaranayake's dream a reality. I want to convey a note of thanks to each and every individual for their dedication and tremendous contribution in making this building complex a reality. In conclusion, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the director of UCSC and all the academic, administrative, and non-academic who worked hand in hand making this event a success. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.
Thank you very much. The Deputy Director of the UCSC, Dr. D.S. Atukorala. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to draw your attention to three areas of interest right now. Firstly, we would be inviting all of you for a time of reception and fellowship. And the reception area is the same floor, level 4. And when you exit from the exit doors, the reception area or the refreshment area is right opposite on the same floor. So that's the reception area. And after the reception, we would be very warmly inviting you to take a few minutes and come to the first floor. Now, the first floor is an area where we have memories of the past. Past 50 memories are, in fact, contained in the first floor. Then if you visit the second floor has some of the latest developments in computing research and development, as well as services offered by the different centers of the UCSC, and these are displayed in the second floor. Now, I'm sure that you won't be satisfied with the past and the present, and we see a very thirsty look in your faces as to the future. I'm sure you would like to know what the future is. And for the future, you need to visit or be a part of the ICTA conference. So thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. We would like you to now enjoy a time of refreshments and fellowship. Thank you, and have a nice evening. Aiboan.